Hello everyone, and welcome back to RealFear Files. Today, I'm bringing you 9 deeply unsettling true horror stories from the isolated small towns of Arizona, where the desert silence hides more than just sand and stone. In this episode, we will journey through the forgotten corners of the Grand Canyon State, exploring accounts of unexplainable events that have left their mark on those who experienced them firsthand. Each story has been carefully researched and adapted from real testimonies shared by individuals who lived through these encounters. To respect the privacy and safety of those involved, certain names and specific locations have been changed. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Real Fear Files for daily true horror content that will chill you to your core. Comment below from where you are watching now and hit that notification bell so you never miss when darkness descends upon your feed. Story 1. This nightmare unfolded in the scorching summer of 2019. It was in a little Arizona desert town, just spitting distance from the sprawling Phoenix metro area. My marriage had been toast for about 3 years by then. I was busting my tail, trying to cling to any scrap of involvement in my daughter's life. She was 13, right in that awkward stage where kids start acting like they're allergic to their parents. So, I made it my mission to show up for absolutely everything. School shindigs, choir rehearsals, youth group at the church, anything to keep a tether to her world. The church we went to was one of those ancient small-town fixtures. It had been there since the 1950s. Back when the town was little more than a dusty rest stop on the highway. It was a no-frills building, white stucco with a crooked old bell tower that never actually rang. The whole congregation was tiny, maybe 60 souls on a good Sunday. Everyone knew everyone. Honestly, that was the hook. After the divorce wrecked me, I desperately needed that sense of belonging. That tight-knit community feel. Pastor John had been the main man for almost 2 decades. He was the epitome of trust. Soft-spoken, thoughtful, and always ready to lend an ear. He ran the youth group himself, helped by the church counselor, a guy named Michael. Michael was younger, maybe early 40s, with those academic-looking wire-rim glasses. He had this unsettlingly gentle demeanor that immediately disarmed people. Before he came to the church, he had a background in social work. He offered free, private counseling sessions to anyone in the flock who needed a shoulder. He dealt with everything: crushing depression, rocky marriages, crippling addiction, raw grief. Michael handled it all with unnerving, quiet compassion. I started pitching in at the church, doing grunt work on the maintenance side. Just small jobs, fixing what broke, touching up paint, swapping out dead light bulbs. It gave me something productive to do on weekends when my daughter was at her mom's place. Plus, it felt good to contribute. The church was strapped for cash, so they relied heavily on volunteers. I was happy to be their free labor. One broiling Saturday in July, Pastor John caught me and asked if I could check out the basement. A monsoon storm had caused some serious water infiltration, and he was freaking out about potential mold. The basement was basically a forgotten tomb. It was rarely used, mostly just a dumping ground for forgotten junk. Ancient hymnals, broken-down pews, and boxes of faded Christmas decorations. The air down there was clammy and tasted stale. The single bare light bulb did a terrible job of cutting through the gloom. I located the water damage pretty fast. A nasty, deep brown stain was blooming across one corner of the wall. When I jabbed my hand at it, the drywall felt like mush. I knew right away I'd have to rip it all out and put up a fresh section. I headed upstairs to grab my demolition tools. When I returned, I started tearing away the waterlogged sheets of wall. That's when I made the grim discovery. Behind the drywall, there was a hidden space, a void. It wasn't odd for old buildings to have a crawl space, but this one had been purposefully blocked off. Someone had constructed a fake wall, clearly designed to conceal whatever was lurking inside. I aimed my flashlight into the dark opening, and my guts twisted into a knot. The crawl space was maybe 4 feet high and stretched back about 15 feet. And it was crammed full of boxes. Cardboard boxes, meticulously stacked and labeled. Each one had a name and a date scribbled on it in black marker. I instantly recognized a few of the names. They were people from this very town. People I'd bumped into at the supermarket, at school functions, even here at church. My hands were shaking as I dragged one of the boxes out into the weak light. The name on it was Sarah Mitchell, and the date read March 2012. I opened it slowly. Inside were personal effects, a driver's license still in a leather wallet, a clunky old cell phone, a set of house keys, a delicate silver bracelet. And at the bottom, carefully wrapped in a brittle piece of newspaper, was a dark lock of hair, tied neatly with a pale ribbon. My whole body was convulsing. I nearly dropped the ominous box. I put it down gently and pulled out a second one. This one was labeled Kevin Harmon, June 2015. Same chilling contents. Personal items, a piece of cheap jewelry, another lock of hair. I forced myself to open a third box. Lisa Brennan, October 2018. There were at least 20 of these cursed boxes back there, maybe more. The crawl space was too deep to see the end. I sat there in the oppressive, dim basement for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the sheer horror of what I was witnessing. These weren't just random lost and found items. These were trophies. Someone had been collecting them, a meticulous, ghoulish inventory. Someone had intentionally hidden them right here, beneath the house of God. And the dates. Some of them went back over a decade. I pulled out my phone and started frantically searching for the names. Sarah Mitchell. I found an old news story from 2012. She was a single mom, worked the night shift at the convenience store on Route 60. Reported vanished. Last seen clocking out. The case went stone cold. Kevin Harmon. Vanished in 2015. A loner, a drifter. Landlord reported him missing when he stopped paying rent. No leads. Then, Lisa Brennan. I remembered her. She was a regular at the church. I'd seen her around. She was young, maybe mid-20s, struggling with a rough addiction. She had been meeting with Michael, getting his counseling. She disappeared a year or so ago. Everyone figured she'd just relapsed and skipped town. The horrific truth slammed into me. These people hadn't just disappeared. Someone had executed them. And someone had been keeping these sick mementos hidden away in this church's cold underbelly for years. I had to dial the cops. But first, I had to figure out who had private, unfettered access to this forgotten basement. I stumbled up the rickety stairs to the main floor, my legs rubbery. The sanctuary was deserted. It was Saturday afternoon, no service until the next morning. I crept through the building, checking the administrative offices. Pastor John's office door was ajar. I slipped inside, feeling like a filthy trespasser, and began rifling through his desk. I wasn't sure what I was hunting for, but the sickening need for answers drove me. In the bottom drawer, I found a heavy ring of keys. One of them had a tag that simply read, "Basement." But that was meaningless. The janitor, the secretary, probably others, all had a copy. I was about to bolt when I noticed a steel filing cabinet tucked in the corner. It was padlocked, but a small silver key on the ring I was holding fit perfectly. Inside were confidential files, Michael's counseling notes. I pulled them out and started reading through the deeply personal records of people's darkest battles, their crippling fears, their deepest traumas. The things they'd never want anyone else on earth to know. As I scanned the pages, a horrifying pattern emerged. Every single person whose name was on one of those trophy boxes in the basement had been counseled by Michael. Every last one. And in the margins of their files, scrawled in angry red ink, were unnerving phrases. Troubled soul. Beyond redemption. Suffering too great. Burdened to family. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper. Michael had been the trusted confidant, the counselor. He'd earned their deepest trust, extracted their secrets, and then he had been executing them. People he judged too broken to save. People nobody would miss, or whose vanishing act could be easily written off as a tragic relapse or simply skipping town. I heard a sound right behind me. I spun around, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. Michael was standing in the doorway, watching me with that exact same placid, unsettlingly gentle expression he always wore. He glanced at the confidential files clutched in my hands, then at the open, locked cabinet. His face didn't twitch, didn't register a single emotion. "Dean," he said, his voice terrifyingly soft. "I truly regret that you discovered this." I dropped the evidence files and lunged for the door, but he was already blocking my path. He wasn't a big guy, but something in his empty eyes froze me solid. There was just nothing there, no raging anger, no flicker of fear, no human emotion whatsoever. Just a terrifyingly calm, dead gaze. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I was helping them. They were suffering, Declan. Every last one of them was drowning in misery. I gave them peace." "You killed them," I stammered. "You murdered them." "I released them," he corrected, his voice still terrifyingly placid. "And I kept a small part of them, to remember, to honor the difficult work I did for them." I launched myself at the door again. He moved to stop me, but the sheer desperation gave me a surge of adrenaline. I was bigger. I shoved past him hard and ran. I burst out of the church and straight to my truck, fumbling desperately for my keys. He didn't pursue me. He simply stood in the doorway of the holy building, watching me speed away, his expression unchanged. I called 911 from the road, barely managing to string a coherent sentence together. I told them the whole twisted tale, the boxes, the files, Michael. They ordered me to proceed directly to the precinct and wait. The ensuing investigation consumed the next few weeks. The FBI got involved because a few of Michael's victims had ties across state lines. They brought in heavy equipment and systematically excavated the scorched desert land behind the church property. They unearthed the grim harvest, the remains of 23 bodies in total. Some of them matched the unfortunate names I had scribbled down from the boxes. Others were people who had never even been officially reported missing. Michael confessed to the entire, horrifying spree. He showed absolutely no remorse. He explained everything in that same terrifyingly serene voice, claiming he was merely carrying out God's work. He was ending suffering. He revealed he had been a counselor and social worker for 2 decades before he ever showed up at the church. He had been doing this work even back then, he claimed, helping people who were beyond any conventional help. The small town was utterly shattered. Families who had long believed their loved ones had simply abandoned them, or who had tragically resigned themselves to a cold disappearance, now had to confront a new, sickening truth. People I had shared a pew with every Sunday had been brutally executed by the man we all trusted implicitly. The man who smiled at our kids, led our prayer groups, and calmly guided people through their very darkest hours. My daughter flat out refused to set foot in that church again. I couldn't blame her. I stopped going too. I couldn't walk through those doors without picturing Michael standing there, watching me with those dead, empty eyes. The trial was a grotesque media circus. National news organizations descended, plastering the headlines. The church counselor killer. It felt deeply repulsive, turning his monstrous actions into a sensational headline, a twisted story for the masses to devour. But that's precisely what it became. During the agonizing trial, a new, spine-chilling detail emerged. A detail that still rips my sleep to shreds. The prosecution revealed they had found evidence of an accomplice, someone who had actively helped Michael transport the corpses, someone who had helped him vet and identify his targets, someone who was still out there, walking free. They never caught the other person. Michael refused to give up a name. He just flashed that infuriatingly gentle smile and kept his mouth shut. He was sentenced to life in the slammer without any chance of parole. Arizona doesn't have capital punishment anymore, so that was the maximum penalty. As far as I know, he's still breathing, sitting in a sterile cell somewhere. But I'm haunted by the accomplice. The sickening fact that someone else in that small congregation was in on the slaughter. Someone else was right there, assisting him. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they got cold feet and stopped after Michael was finally collared. Or maybe they just packed up, moved to another state and found a new church, a new, trusting community to prey upon. I hauled my stuff out of that town 6 months after the trial finally wrapped. I couldn't stay there. Every time I ran into someone from the old church, the same question screamed in my head. Was it you? Were you his helper? Did you know what was going on and keep quiet? My daughter now lives with her mother full-time. We still talk, but the easy bond is gone. She gets night terrors sometimes. She was in the youth group Michael helped run. She sat in the same damn room with him, laughed at his lame jokes, and trusted him. Now, she's burdened with the knowledge that she was inches away from a prolific, quiet monster. I replay all the times I volunteered at that church. All the times I walked right past that basement door, blissfully unaware of the horror buried beneath my feet. I think about Sarah Mitchell, Kevin Harmon, and Lisa Brennan, and all the nameless others. I think about the way Michael looked at me when I found his files, calm and totally unbothered, as if I had merely discovered a minor office secret instead of concrete evidence of decades of pure evil. And I think about the accomplice, still out there, somewhere, quietly carrying their own sickening secrets. Some places feel sacred because of the beautiful things that happen there. And some places feel sacred because of the profound, unholy darkness they choose to hide. Story 2. I rolled into Arizona in the spring of 2018. I was chasing a ghost of a fresh start after my life back in Colorado went sideways. I landed a job as a ranch hand on a spread about 40 miles outside of Tucson. We were way out in the sticks, where the desert sprawls forever and the closest neighbor is a 20-minute drive away. The owner, an ancient guy named Hank, lived in the main house, but he was practically a hermit. He was riddled with health issues and pretty much kept to himself. My gig was to patch up the barbed wire fences, feed the horses, make sure the water tanks were full, and keep a general eye on the place. In exchange, I got a measly salary and a janky old trailer to crash in on the far edge of the property. The trailer was nothing to write home about. A single wide, probably vintage 70s. It had walls thin as paper and a roof that clattered like a drum whenever the wind picked up. But it was mine. After couch surfing and living out of my pickup for 6 months, it felt like a 5-star resort. The isolation didn't faze me. I'd always been a solitary dude. And at night, the desert had a brutal, majestic beauty. The stars out there are just mind-blowing. There are so many you can barely see the blackness between them. I worked the graveyard shift mostly. I was up when the sun dipped and asleep when it came up. Hank preferred it that way, said it was easier on the livestock during the brutal summer heat. I was fine with it. The desert cools off nicely after dark, and there's a real primal peace working under that sky, with only the wind and the occasional coyotes howl for company. Things were chill for the first few months. I found my groove, memorized the property, bonded with the horses. Hank mostly left me be, which suited me fine. But by late August, the vibe shifted. One night, around 2 a.m., I was inside the trailer fixing myself a cup of Java before heading out to patrol the east fence line. The wind had been kicking up a fuss earlier, and I wanted to make sure nothing was shredded. I was standing at the tiny counter when I heard it. Footfalls. Heavy, deliberate, measured footsteps circling the outside of the trailer. At first, I figured it was one of the horses. They sometimes wander over to the trailer, curious or looking for a stray bucket. But these steps were too heavy, too rhythmic. And they were circling methodically, clockwise, around and around, like whatever was out there knew exactly what it was doing. I snatched my flashlight and flung open the door, blasting the beam out into the pitch-black night. Nothing. Just barren desert scrub, creosote bushes, and the dim outline of the Rincon Mountains under the starlight. But I could still hear the footfalls. Now they were moving away, receding into the blackness. I stood there for a long time, listening intently, but the sounds didn't return. I tried to talk myself down. It was probably a javelina, or maybe a stray steer from the ranch next door. I went back inside and finished my coffee, but a deep, sinking unease clung to me for the rest of the night. 3 nights later, it happened again. Same witching hour, around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, hovering just shy of sleep, when the sounds started. Those exact same heavy, methodical footsteps, circling the trailer. 1, 2, 3 times around. I counted them. And then, dead silence. This time, I didn't open the door. I crept to the window and pressed my face right up against the cold glass. That's when I saw it. It was absolutely massive, at least 8 feet tall at the shoulder. It was draped in reddish fur, the color of old copper in the moonlight. It moved in a way that defied nature. Slow and intentional, its legs ridiculously long, its body too angular and alien. And there was something on its back, something dark and hunched that I couldn't quite make out. I watched it complete one more agonizing circle of the trailer. Then it turned and lumbered into the desert, vanishing into the darkness as cleanly as if it had been erased. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat at the kitchen table, every single light in the trailer blazing, my rifle resting across my lap, waiting for the dawn to break the spell. When the sun finally rose, I bolted outside to find the evidence. I found the tracks easily. The ground was soft, loose sand, and the prints were deep and sickeningly clear. They weren't horse tracks. They were too large, too perfectly round. Cloven hooves, maybe, but monstrously bigger than any cow or bull I'd ever seen. I called Hank and told him what I'd witnessed. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he asked me flat out if I'd been drinking. I told him no. He let out a long sigh and said he'd come down for a look. He showed up an hour later, moving slowly, relying heavily on a cane. He examined the prints, walked a slow, heavy circle around the trailer, and then just stared at me. "You're going to think I've gone bonkers," he rasped. "But I believe every word." He dropped the dark folklore on me then. The Red Spectre. An ancient, terrifying legend from the 1880s about a colossal red camel that terrorized the Arizona territory. It supposedly had the skeleton of a rider strapped impossibly tight to its back. It had been spotted everywhere, attacking settlers, trampling a woman to death, smashing wagons. The legend claimed it was finally killed in 1893 by a grizzled rancher. He shot it dead and discovered it was merely a feral camel from the old U.S. Army Camel Corps, with a human corpse bound to its back so tightly the straps had melted into the animal's hide. "But that was over 100 years ago, Hank," I protested. "I know," he replied, his voice low. "But people still see it. Every few years, someone reports something huge and red moving out here at night. They're usually just laughed off, but I've heard the whispers. And now you've seen it too." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice cracking. He shrugged. "Nothing you can do. It doesn't seem to actively hurt folks anymore. Far as I know, it just wanders. If it comes back, don't you dare go outside. Don't try to follow it. Just let the damn thing pass." 3 nights later, like a clockwork nightmare, it returned. Same time, 2 a.m. I heard the sickeningly familiar footfalls circling the trailer. I went straight to the window and watched. It was the same entity, massive, copper red, moving with that unsettling, deliberate gait. And this time, under the harsh moonlight, I could see the macabre cargo on its back clearly. It was a skeleton. A bleached white human skeleton, still lashed to the creature with ancient leather that had rotted and seemingly fused with the animal's scarred skin. The bones were impossibly white, the skull cocked at a grotesque angle. And as the creature circled, I swear to God, the skull turned its empty eye sockets and looked right at me. I recoiled from the window, heart hammering so hard I thought I might collapse. The creature finished its third agonizing circle and stopped right outside the trailer. Its massive head swiveled toward my window. Then I heard something that turned my blood to ice. A voice. Faint, dry, and rasping, like the sound of wind whispering through desiccated tumbleweeds. It was coming from the creature, or maybe from the horror on its back. I couldn't tell which. "Cut me free." I froze solid. The words were perfectly clear, unmistakable. An ancient, desperate, soul-crushing plea. "Cut me free." The creature stood there for what felt like an eternity of chilling stillness. Then it simply turned and vanished into the night. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept every light burning, the rifle locked and loaded. I waited, but it didn't reappear. Not that week, not the next. I begged Hank if I could swap trailers, maybe move closer to the main house. He said he didn't have another one. He even offered to let me crash on his couch, but I couldn't swallow my pride and admit I was that utterly terrified. I lasted another month in that accursed trailer, jumping at every tiny sound, every passing shadow. The specter didn't return, but I couldn't shake the chilling sense that it was out there, lurking, watching, waiting. And that voice, begging for release, was the soundtrack to every minute I closed my eyes. In October, I pulled the plug. I told Hank I had a family emergency back in Colorado, a total fabrication, but he didn't push. He paid me my due wages and wished me good luck. As I was loading the last of my meager possessions, he handed me an ancient book, its yellowed pages held together with dirty duct tape. "Someone gave me this years ago," he said. "It's about the Red Spectre, the real story, not just the local campfire tales. Maybe it'll help you make sense of the madness you saw." I devoured it that night in a seedy motel in Tucson. The book was a collection of faded newspaper clippings and first-hand accounts from the 1880s. The descriptions matched my encounter perfectly. A monstrous, 8-foot-tall red camel with a human corpse strapped to its spine. Witnesses described the same bizarre circling behavior, the same deliberate, unnatural movements. Several accounts mentioned hearing a voice, although most chalked it up to wind or a fractured imagination. One article stood out in stark relief. A prospector named Will claimed he faced the thing in 1890. He said the skeleton actually spoke to him, begging to be severed from its bonds. Will tried to approach, but the camel spooked and bolted. He noted that the skeleton looked oddly fresh, not decades old as it should have been. He wondered if the creature was somehow preserving the body, or if some other supernatural horror was at work. The final clipping, dated 1893, described the specter's demise. A rancher named Mazzy shot it dead. When he examined the body, the leather straps had indeed grown into the camel's flesh. The skeleton was still attached, but when he tried to remove it, it instantly crumbled to dust. But here's the kicker, the detail that made my stomach revolt. The book included a compiler's note, dated 1975. They wrote that sightings of the Red Spectre had continued well into the 20th century. People reported seeing it near the U.S.-Mexico border, near a desolate town called Vicksburg, and as recently as 1968, right outside of Tucson. Some legends never die, the note concluded. They just keep walking. I fled Arizona the next day and haven't looked back. I moved through New Mexico, then Nevada, then California. I kept moving, keeping my head down, trying desperately to scrub the image from my brain. But now and then, late at night, when the wind howls, I hear those footfalls. Heavy, deliberate, circling. And I hear that voice, faint and desperate. Cut me free. I don't know what I saw out there. Maybe it was the Red Spectre, somehow still enslaved to its horrifying task. Maybe it was something much older and more terrifyingly strange. But I know what I heard, and I know that voice was the real deal. Hank called me a few months later. He wanted to tell me he'd found a new ranch hand, some young buck from Texas. I asked if he warned him about the specter. Hank chuckled and said no. He said some things people just need to figure out on their own. I thought about calling the new guy, giving him a heads up. But what would I even say? That a ghost camel with a screaming skeleton on its back circles his trailer every 3 nights and begs for a knife? He'd think I was a lunatic. A year later, Hank called again. The new ranch hand had abruptly quit, packed his bags and blew out in the middle of the night without a single word of explanation. Hank found a note taped to the trailer door. It had only 2 words. I heard it. That was 3 years ago. I still think about it all the time. I wonder if the creature is still out there, still making its rounds, still hauling its gruesome burden. And I wonder about that skeleton, trapped for over a century, begging anyone who listens to cut it free. I didn't do it. I couldn't. Maybe that makes me a coward. But every time I picture opening that door and facing that colossal, horrifying thing, I remember those empty eye sockets staring at me through the glass. And I know I made the only possible choice. Some things are meant to stay bound, and some ancient debts are simply never meant to be paid. Story 3. I piloted the same beat-up, yellow school rig for 4 miserable years in a flyover district right outside of Prescott. Route 7, 25 stops, 53 rugrats on a typical morning. I knew every little face, every nickname. I knew which little dude needed a boost with his oversized Paw Patrol backpack, who was always slouched in the back row, and which parents were forever running 5 minutes behind schedule. After 4 years, this gig gets etched into your soul. You become a fixture in their chaotic little lives, and their little dramas become a strange part of yours. It was a hellish Wednesday morning in early November 2021 when the whole thing went sideways. The air had a sharp, metallic bite, the scrub oak was a rusty red, and everything felt bog standard when I started my run at 6:30 a.m. The first pit stop was the Blackwell homestead, where 2 sisters, 2nd and 4th grade, were always waiting by the mailbox. They hopped on, chirped a shaky, "Good morning, Mr. Finn," and slid into their usual spot right behind my driver's seat. Second stop, the Jensen twins, absolute ankle-biters in kindergarten. Their old man always walked them up to the curb. They climbed aboard, absolutely cackling about something stupid. They settled into the bench right behind the Blackwell girls. The third stop. That's where the ice in my veins began to crack. The same two Blackwell sisters were standing there. Same bubblegum pink backpacks, same puffy jackets, same damn everything. I thought I had a massive case of the jitters. I snapped my eyes up to the rearview mirror at the girls already seated, then back at the twin specters waiting at the stop. Identical. "Hurry up, Piper! We're going to be late!" one of the girls on the curb yelled out. That was their signature line, a little routine they had. I threw open the bus door, feeling like I was in a daze. The two girls clambered on, mumbled, "Good morning, Mr. Finn," in the exact same unsettling tone as the first pair, and crept down the aisle. They walked right past the first set of Blackwell sisters without a flicker of recognition, without even glancing over, and sat down in the usual spot further back. I was paralyzed, hands locked on the steering wheel, staring at four identical girls, two eerie sets of the same children. My heart was jackhammering in my chest. I swung around in my seat. "Girls," I croaked, "did you already get on the bus this morning?" The second pair looked at me, confusion blanketing their faces. "We just did, Mr. Finn. What's up?" I looked at the first pair. They were staring out the window, completely oblivious to the utter nightmare unfolding behind them. I looked back at the second pair. They looked solid, totally real. I could see the little clouds of their breath in the freezing morning air. "Is this some kind of messed up prank?" I asked. "What prank?" one of them replied, her voice flat. I drove to the fourth stop, my hands shaking like a leaf. When I pulled up, the Jensen twins were there again, the very same two kindergartners who were already sitting in the second row. I watched in a rising panic as they climbed on, gave their little "hello" to me, and strolled right past their duplicates to take a seat in the third row. This couldn't be happening. This was grade A mind rot. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over, grabbing my radio mic. "I need to talk to dispatch, now. Something is seriously wrong." "What's the issue, Finn? Having mechanical trouble?" "No, I'm seeing the kids twice. The exact same kids are getting on at different stops. It's a freak show." There was a long, chilling silence. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to pull over?" "I am pulled over. I'm telling you, the same damn children are on my bus twice. 2 sets of the Blackwell sisters, 2 sets of the Jensen twins. This is not normal." "Finn, that's completely whacked. Are you sure you haven't lost track of your stops?" I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. "I know my route. I've been on this route for 4 years. I'm telling you, something is wrong." "Just finish your run and get back to the yard, Finn. We'll chew over this when you get here." I finished the route in a state of absolute dissociation. Stop after stop, the horrors multiplied. Some kids appeared only once, their regular selves, but 6 of them appeared twice. Separate stops, identical children. And the most bone-chilling part was that none of them, not a single one, acknowledged their doubles. They sat in different seats, stared out different windows, chatted with different friends. It was like each set was existing in its own chilling, separate reality. When I dropped the kids off at the school, I counted them as they filed out. 59 children got off the bus. There should have been 53. 6 too many. 6 duplicates. I drove straight back to the depot and bolted into my supervisor's office. She had me sit down and asked me to run the whole insane story by her again. I told her every terrifying detail. She listened with that practiced, concerned look. The one you give a person you're sure is having a total meltdown. Finn, I think you need to take a few days off. This job can be brutal, and maybe you just need to chill out. I'm not crazy, I bit out. Check the security footage. The bus has cameras. You can see the proof with your own eyes. She agreed, and we trudged down to the tech room. They pulled up the footage from that morning. We watched the first stop. The Blackwell sisters got on, plain as day. We watched the third stop. Nothing. The curb was empty. The bus drove right past it without even tapping the brakes. That's not what happened, I yelled. I stopped there. They got on. We watched the internal footage. Only 2 Blackwell sisters. Only 2 Jensen twins. 53 kids total. Finn, my supervisor said softly, her voice dripping with pity. I think you need to see a shrink. This could be a brain thing. Memory gaps, seeing things. These can be warning signs of something serious. I left the depot feeling like I was absolutely losing my grip on reality. Maybe I was. Maybe I had a brain tumor. I went home and tried to sleep, but all I could see were those duplicated kids. The way they moved, the way they spoke, they were real. I knew they were solid. That night, I decided to do something completely reckless. I drove back along my entire route and started taking high-resolution pictures of every single stop. I logged everything: the house numbers, the street names, the exact times. Then I started cross-referencing all of it with the school district's files. That's when I hit the first abyssal truth. One of the duplicate children, a girl named Zoe, who always boarded at stop 5 and again at stop 10, was listed in the records as having relocated 6 months ago. Her mother had called the school in May to let them know they were moving to Texas. But I had absolutely picked up Zoe that morning. Twice. I dove deeper into the files. Another duplicate, a little guy named Caleb, had been marked absent for the entire month of October. His folks had claimed he was staying with his grandpa down in San Diego, but I had seen him on my bus that morning. Twice. I tried calling Zoe's mother. The line was dead. I called Caleb's parents. No answer. I drove to Caleb's house that afternoon. It was a complete ghost town. Windows were dark, no cars in the driveway. I peered through the window and saw that the place had been completely emptied out. I called my supervisor again, my voice shaking. The duplicate kids aren't supposed to be here. They moved away. They're gone. Something is replacing them. Finn, you need to cut this out, she snapped. You're starting to really spook people. If you keep this up, I'm going to have to put you on immediate administrative leave. I stopped calling her. Instead, I launched my own terrifying, unauthorized investigation. I drove to the houses of every duplicated child. 3 of them were empty, the families having vanished months ago. 2 of them had parents who answered the door but looked at me like I was a genuine lunatic and said they had no clue what I was talking about. Their children weren't on my route. They had never been on my route. One family, the Jensens, the parents of the tiny, giggling twins, actually let me into their home. I showed them the photographs I had taken of their girls getting onto my bus. They stared at the images for what felt like an eternity, and then the mother started to weep. "Those are not our daughters," she whispered, her voice shredded. "Our daughters. They vanished back in August. We thought they ran off, but the police couldn't find them. We've been tearing this town apart for 2 months. I've been picking them up every morning," I said, my voice barely a breath. They get on at stop 2 and again at stop 9. They chat. They laugh. They look exactly like real children. The father grabbed my shoulders, his grip like a vice. "Where are they? Where do they go?" School, I choked out. I dropped them off at the elementary school. We drove to the school together. The principal looked at me like I had completely lost my marbles when I asked if the Jensen twins were in class. She pulled up the records. Neither girl had attended school since August. No absences logged. No records of them ever being dropped off by the bus. But I dropped them off every single day, I insisted, my voice rising in a desperate plea. I watched them walk right into the building. The principal and the Jensens followed me outside. I pointed to the spot where I always dropped off the kids. Right there. They get off and walk through that door. That door leads to the faculty lounge, the principal said, her brow furrowed. It's bolted shut in the mornings. The children enter through the main entrance across the parking lot. I walked over to the door. It was locked with a heavy deadbolt. I peered through the small window. The room beyond was dark and completely empty. I turned back to the Jensens. The mother was openly sobbing, a sound of pure maternal grief. The father looked at me with a terrifying mixture of broken hope and boiling rage. "Where did they go?" he demanded. "Where are my daughters?" I didn't have an answer for him. That night, my sanity hanging by a thread, I decided to follow one of the duplicates. I ditched the depot after my afternoon run and drove back along the path the bus had taken. I waited at stop 9, where the second, duplicate set of Jensen twins always got off. At 3:30 p.m., I spotted them. Two little girls, holding hands, walking down the desolate, winding road. I got out of my car and shadowed them on foot. They never looked back. They didn't acknowledge me. They just kept walking, with a strange, unnatural purpose. They walked for nearly an hour, past the last scattering of houses, past the tree line, and deep into the tangled, dark forest. I followed, my heart a terrified drum solo in my chest, my cell phone recording the whole insane ordeal. And then they stopped. Right at the ragged edge of a dark, overgrown clearing, they both turned to face me. Their faces were utterly blank. No expression, no childhood mischief, no emotion. Just two empty, doll-like masks. And then they started walking backward, still facing me, moving faster than any child should be able to move. They backed into the towering black trees, and the forest simply swallowed them whole. I sprinted to the spot where they had been. There was nothing. No disturbed leaves, no tiny footprints in the dirt, just the silent, empty woods. I quit the next day. I packed a suitcase, broke my lease, and drove 1,000 miles to Seattle. I couldn't stay in that rotten town anymore. I couldn't drive that route anymore, knowing that something monstrous was lurking out there. Something that was snatching children and replacing them with these horrific, empty copies. The Jensens never found their daughters. Neither did the parents of the other missing children. The cops investigated, but they hit a wall. No leads, zero evidence, no explanation. I still have the photographs. I look at them sometimes, at those duplicate children with their hollow stares and dead eyes, and I wonder how many other buses, how many other drivers have seen the same goddamn thing I saw and convinced themselves they were going completely bonkers. I wonder if those children are still out there, walking backward into the forest, disappearing into the nothingness. And I wonder what the hell happens to them when they finally get there. Story 4. I hauled ass to Arizona in the bone-chilling February of 2021. It was right after I'd detoxed for the second time. My shrink figured a change of scenery would do me good, get me the hell away from the people and places that were my ultimate downfall. So, I crammed my pitiful belongings into the pickup and burned rubber west. I landed in this godforsaken dust trap called Vulture Creek. It was about a solid hour's drive from anywhere worth a damn. I shacked up in a trailer park that looked like a boneyard, just sitting there on the desert's edge, a graveyard of forgotten junk. The rent was dirt cheap, and that's all that mattered to a broke slob like me. I was clocking part-time hours at a Speedway gas station, trying to piece my life back together, one agonizing day at a time. The isolation was supposed to be a cure, a chance to laser focus on me, no distractions allowed. But solitude is a nasty magnifying glass. It blows everything up, especially when the desert wind wails like a banshee at midnight and you're trapped alone with your worst nightmares. I kept to myself, didn't want any pals. I was fighting tooth and nail to stay sober, and that meant dodging anyone who could drag me back to my old, filthy habits. The only lifeline I had to the living world was this late-night talk show that broadcast out of Phoenix. The host, some dude named Reaper, took calls from folks all over the Grand Canyon state. They'd chew the fat about everything. Alien conspiracies, toxic relationships, straight-up terrifying experiences. I'd tune in while scrubbing the grime off the trailer floor or just trying to pass out. Sometimes, those random voices made the crushing loneliness feel a little less absolute. It was mid-April when the unholy voicemail nightmare began. The first one dropped at 3:47 in the a.m. My phone vibrated like crazy on the nightstand. That sickening double pulse that signals a new message. The number was a ghost. Local area code, but definitely not a contact I knew. I played the damn thing. Just static at first, then this woman's voice, raw and terrified, like she was screaming from the bottom of a well. "Alex, I'm begging you. I need your help. Please, I'm lost. It's pitch black, and I can't find the way out. For God's sake, Alex, help me." The message just died. I sat up in the darkness, heart hammering in my chest like a drum solo, trying to place that voice. It was vaguely familiar, a sliver of a memory, but I couldn't nail it down. I tried calling the number back. It rang 6 times, then went to a generic, soulless answering machine. I hung up, but the icy dread wouldn't melt. The next night, same cursed time, 3:47 a.m. Another phantom voicemail, different number, same local code. This time, a man's voice, raspy and desperate. "Alex, where the hell are you? I've been searching everywhere. You gotta come back, man, please. I can't hack this alone. Alex, please." Again, the voice was a whisper from my past, a shadow I couldn't quite touch. Again, I tried to call back. Same crap result. Generic, dead-end voicemail. The third night, I was primed for battle. I stayed up, phone clutched in a white-knuckle grip, waiting. At exactly 3:47, the goddamn thing buzzed. I snatched it up before it could go to the machine. "Hello?" Silence. Just that sickening static. And underneath it, something that sounded like a labored, wet gasp. Then the line went dead. I checked the voicemail anyway. It was there. A woman's voice, different from the first one. "Alex, why did you abandon me? I needed you, and you were nowhere to be found. I'm still waiting. Come back, please, please." A lightning bolt of horror hit me. I knew this voice. It was my mother. But that was impossible. She was 3 years in the grave. She OD'd in a flea-bag motel room back in Denver, while I was rotting in the county jail on a possession rap. I didn't even hear about it until 2 weeks after, and they wouldn't let me out for the funeral. I dropped the phone like it was a glowing ember. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to tell myself it was a sick, twisted prank. Someone knew my history and was messing with my head. But who? Who even knew I was holed up in this forgotten wasteland? The voicemails kept coming, every single night at 3:47. Different ghosts, different numbers, but always the same soul-shattering pleas. And then the voices started clicking. I was recognizing more of them. A buddy from way back who wrapped his car around a tree when we were 16. My ex-girlfriend, the one I put through hell during my worst years of using. My first sponsor, who relapsed and bought the farm 6 months after I did. They were the casualties of my past, the people I'd let down, the ones I'd hurt. Some were people I didn't even know were dead. I stopped sleeping altogether. I'd just sit there in the trailer, every light blazing, staring at my phone, counting down the seconds to 3:47. And every single night, like a macabre appointment, it would buzz. Sometimes just one message, sometimes 3 or 4. And the messages were always the same, chanting my name, pleading for salvation, begging me to return to the abyss. I tried every trick in the book. I blocked the numbers, but a new parade of digits would show up. I even changed my phone number, but they found the new one in less than 24 hours. I turned the phone completely off. The next morning, I found 17 voicemails waiting for me, all time-stamped 3:47, all from new, phantom numbers, all carrying those desperate, spectral voices. I started noticing the terrible patterns. The voices used the same exact words, the same dreadful intonations. "Alex, I need your help. Where are you? I'm still waiting." Like they were reading from some demonic script. Like they weren't quite real, but they sounded real. They sounded exactly like the people I remembered. Right down to the way my mother's voice would crack when she said my name. The way my buddy would let out a nervous chuckle before asking for a favor. The way my ex's voice would drop to a deadly whisper when she was truly wounded. I went to the law. They listened to my tale politely, said it sounded like harassment, told me to log everything and file a report. I did. Nothing changed. I went to the phone company. They said the numbers were spoofed, untraceable digital ghosts. No help there. I even went to a priest. He listened to the horrific messages and actually blessed my phone with holy water. That night, I got 12 voicemails instead of 1. By the end of the first month, my voicemail box was a bottomless pit of terror. Hundreds of messages, all at 3:47, all from people I had loved or lost, all screaming for me to save them. I quit listening. I'd just delete them in one huge sweep every morning, trying not to look at the names and numbers on the screen. But I couldn't escape the presence of them. Even when I didn't listen, the sheer knowledge of those voices piling up, demanding my attention, waiting for me, was enough to make me feel like I was drowning in liquid ice. I picked up the bottle again. Not a full-blown bender at first, just enough to dull the screaming edges, but I knew it was the fast track back to hell. I stumbled into a meeting and tried to explain the nightmare. Nobody bought it. They figured I was pulling a stunt, manufacturing a crisis to justify my relapse. Maybe they were right. It was late May when the whole thing went completely off the rails. I was lying in bed, phone powered down and shoved in a sock drawer, when I heard it. My mother's voice, clear as a bell, coming right out of the tiny kitchen. "Alex, I need your help, please. I don't know where I am." I shot straight up, my whole body seized by a paralyzing cold. The trailer was a box. There was nowhere to hide. I snatched a butcher knife from the nightstand and crept toward the kitchen. It was empty, but the voice kept talking, coming from everywhere and nowhere, filling the small space with its chilling, desperate cry. "Alex, where are you? I've been looking everywhere. You need to come back." I bolted outside, into the black desert night, and the voice chased me. More voices now, a shrieking chorus, all overlapping, all saying the same terrifying phrases, all screaming my name. I clamped my hands over my ears and ran blindly, but I couldn't outrun them. They were either inside my skull or surrounding me. I couldn't tell the difference. I don't know how long I ran. Eventually, I just collapsed into the gritty sand, hyperventilating, and the voices finally vanished. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. No wind, no crickets, nothing but me, the empty desert, and the cold stars. When I staggered back to the trailer, the sun was just creeping over the horizon. I threw my few things into the truck and drove. I had no destination. I just knew I had to escape that place. I made it as far as Phoenix before I checked into a cheap motel and crashed hard. That night at 3:47, my phone buzzed. But this time, it rang. A real call, not a voicemail. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Then I answered. Hello? Multiple voices spoke at once, a horrifying blend of the familiar, all chanting my name. Alex, Alex, Alex. Over and over. A dreadful choir of the damned and the broken. Every person I had ever failed. Every person I had ever hurt. Everyone I had left behind. And then, in perfect, chilling unison, they delivered the final blow. You can't run from us. We are always with you. We are waiting. I launched the phone across the room. It smashed into the wall and exploded into pieces. I sat on the edge of the bed, gasping, trying to convince my fractured mind that it was finally over. The next morning, I checked myself into a high-end rehab facility in Scottsdale. I told them I was experiencing severe auditory hallucinations and needed immediate help. They admitted me, put me on some heavy meds, and started me on intensive group therapy. I stayed for a solid 90 days. I never told them about the voicemails. I couldn't. How do you tell that story without sounding like you belong in a straitjacket? Instead, I focused on drying out, on grappling with the mountain of guilt and the trauma that had been crushing me for years. And slowly, agonizingly, things started to improve. When I got out, I got a new phone with a completely different number. I moved up to Flagstaff, found a job slinging espresso at a coffee joint, and started hitting meetings religiously. I never went back to Vulture Creek. I wouldn't even drive through that damn area code. For 6 months, I was clear. No voicemails, no disembodied voices, nothing. I started to believe the whole nightmare was tied to that godforsaken trailer park, to that desolate patch of desert. But last week, the terror returned. I got a voicemail. 3:47 in the AM, a number I didn't know, local area code. I deleted it instantly, didn't even listen, and tried to fall back asleep. The next night, another one. Deleted without a second thought. Last night, I made the worst mistake of my life. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to be sure. Maybe I foolishly thought it would be a crank call this time. I played voicemail. It was my own voice. Alex, I need your help. Please. I don't know where I am. It's dark, and I can't find the way out. Please, Alex, help me. I checked the records. The message had been sent from my own number. I had called myself and left that message. Except I hadn't. I was stone cold asleep. I have no memory of doing it. Tonight, I'm sitting here in my small apartment, every single light burning bright, staring at my phone. It's 3:46. 60 seconds until the horror show starts again. And I'm terrified of whose voice I'll hear this time. Terrified that it will be me again, pleading for a savior from the utter blackness. Because if I am calling myself for help, if I'm trapped in that same soul-crushing darkness too, then maybe I never actually escaped that trailer park. Maybe I never truly got clean. Maybe I'm still there, in Vulture Creek, screaming into the void, and nobody, absolutely nobody, is answering the call. Story 5. When folks rag on the ghost towns of Arizona, they usually mean dead spots like Kingman or Bisbee. Places that cashed out decades back when the silver veins ran dry and the interstate bypass sucked away all the tourist bucks. I ended up in one of these decrepit hellholes. Not by choice, mind you, but because my granny kicked the bucket and left me a rotting shack. Nowhere else felt truly secure. Between pulling the graveyard shift at the only drugstore for 60 miles, hustling side gigs on the weekends, and figuring out what to do with the inherited nightmare house, small-town life became a grim cycle. My name is Bella. In high school, I was a total science geek and hated big crowds. Pharmacy school was a weird fit. It let me heal people, but kept me behind a counter, head down. The storefront where I worked was built into the skeleton of an old copper foreman's office. It had huge window panes that hadn't locked since the Cold War. A nasty linoleum floor held together by industrial duct tape, and a single, loud refrigerator in the corner, nursing vaccines, insulin, and emergency milk. During my overnight shifts, the only sounds were the lonely semis rumbling past, the rhythmic thud-thud of the ancient wall clock, and the occasional dry cough from the alley out back. It was on one of these chilling, quiet nights, just before the summer hit, that the first sign of this cosmic horror slinked through the door. Zeke, a regular customer, shuffled in looking utterly drained and out of his mind. He shoved a prescription for some heavy sleep aids at me and stood there, murmuring something insane about fine-tuning his cognitive mainframe. That phrase hit me like a cold wave. Zeke was usually a grumpy, no-nonsense guy, not someone who threw around tech jargon. "You good?" I asked. Zeke offered a weak, glassy-eyed smirk. "Just making huge leaps, upgrading the wetware," he mumbled. He paid for his pills and bolted, leaving behind a thick residue of pure dread I couldn't scrub off. Over the next week, others started the same routine. Maya, who was quiet and a major bookworm, suddenly began spouting clinical nonsense. She talked about synaptic augmentation and erasing biological impedance. Even Gus, the town's repairman known for his long, pointless stories, came in asking if I stocked a pill that could juice his internal processor. At first, I figured it was some terrible viral meme I'd missed, but their faces were always blank, utterly vacant, and their voices held a chilling lack of emotion. I grew genuinely scared as the pattern locked into place. Every single person using this techno-speak had filled a script for the exact same new drug. The bottle was labeled Calyx Farm, a name I'd never once heard in the business. It arrived with the last massive batch of generics that the pharmacy owner had switched to, hoping to pinch pennies. The pills looked fine, small, round capsules stamped with a vivid blue logo. I called the main Calyx support line, but it went straight to a dead, echoing voicemail every time. The real, soul-shattering shock came when Dennis stumbled in late one night, drenched in sweat. He was usually the town's rock, the voice of reason. Dennis gripped the counter so hard his knuckles turned white and whispered, "Bella, can you please help me shut down the upgrade?" "Dennis, what the hell are you talking about?" I asked, my own heart pounding. "My thoughts aren't mine anymore. You have to do something, Belle, please, before I lose the last piece of myself." I gave him a water cup and walked him to the break room, immediately calling his wife for pickup. When she finally arrived half an hour later, Dennis was just staring at the peeling wallpaper, his lips moving silently. He didn't even register her face. By midsummer, the entire town felt wrong, twisted. People shuffled the streets at night, silent, keeping their distance from each other. The few teenagers left in town sprinted home before sunset. The older residents either clammed up completely or packed up and vanished. Every week, another fresh face came in for the Calyx script. I tried to scream warnings at them, but they simply couldn't hear me. Suspecting a clear link, I went through the shipment logs and the supplier invoices. Calyx wasn't registered in any state pharmaceutical databases. The pills had 0 known active ingredients, no FDA approval. When I tried to flat out refuse to fill the next batch of scripts, the pharmacy owner threatened to fire me. "New drugs are the way of the future, Belle," he snarled. "Either get with the program or find a new gig." I started monitoring the pill takers closely. A sickly paleness settled over their skin. Their movements became jerky, clockwork. If I spoke, they responded with cold, machine-like precision. Worse, their eyes reflected light unnaturally. It was only noticeable in the dark, a flash of metallic blue instead of the normal red-eye effect. One night, I secretly trailed Zeke, Maya, and Gus as they walked out of the pharmacy after closing. They strode straight through the deserted streets toward the old copper mine at the edge of Vulture Creek. That mine had been sealed off for years after some local kids disappeared down there. Instead of going around the chain-link fence, the three of them simply crawled under a wide gap and were swallowed by the shadows. I waited, listening hard. Faint sounds drifted out, a worrying, low, collective whisper, repeating something rhythmic, almost a ritualistic drone. Driven by pure terror, I went back the next night, following 5 more town residents. Same horror pattern. Crawl under the barrier, vanish inside the earth. I immediately called Quentin, the county health inspector, one of the few people I still trusted implicitly. He listened to my rambling in absolute silence and said, "I'll meet you at dawn. But please, Bella, don't risk going in there by yourself." We met at the mine entrance, armed with massive flashlights and a desperate prayer that this nightmare had a simple explanation. Inside the main vertical shaft, we were met with a sight from hell. Dozens of townspeople were arranged in a perfect circle, each hunched over a filthy desktop computer powered by a grotesque tangle of extension cords leading to a loud, smoking diesel generator. Their faces were bathed in the screen's eerie blue light. A voice, chillingly detached and synthetic, boomed from a cheap loudspeaker. "Connect, upload, enhance." The blue-eyed assembly typed silently, the blue reflections pulsing in their pupils as lines of alien code scrolled across the monitors. Gus stood up slowly and locked his empty gaze on us. "You are granted the choice to evolve, or you will be abandoned," he droned. "Those who enhance will survive this coming transformation." Quentin tried to rationally talk Gus out, but he only repeated the mantra. We retreated quickly, calling the sheriff and the state health board. Shutting down the mine was easy, but it didn't stop the change. Over the next few days, the entire town began migrating toward the mine every night, joining the silent, blue-eyed congregation. Families that tried to resist were intensely pressured by their neighbors, threatened with exclusion and isolation. Worried sick, I started a deep dive into Calyx Farm. There was no trace of its existence anywhere. No business filings, no tax records, no address. Just a ghost placeholder in a far-off city. When I finally called their support line again, a sharp, artificial voice responded. "If you desire true mental freedom, ingest the capsule. If not, terminate contact now." I realized that Gus, Zeke, Maya, and half the population hadn't actually come to the pharmacy in days. I reviewed the security camera footage. The tapes showed the exact same faces entering, always in tight pairs or trios, never solo. Their movements perfectly synchronized, regardless of the day or hour. At night, the horror deepened. Sometimes Gus would enter twice in one evening, each time with a different entourage. Reviewing the tapes side by side, it was painfully clear that something had replicated not just their actions, but their very identities. A person would appear at the front counter at 7 p.m. and then again at 10 p.m. A person would enter the front and leave by the back, only to magically reappear moments later, entering the front again. The chaos peaked when a local mom, Clara Jennings, rushed in at closing time, clutching her young son and begging hysterically for help. "He took the pill once," she sobbed. "Please tell me what is happening to him. He's not my boy anymore." Her son, Kevin, stood next to her, his eyes that signature metallic blue. "I must return," he whispered, his voice utterly devoid of human warmth. Jennings tried to physically restrain him, but Kevin easily shoved past her and marched into the darkness, joining the endless line of blue-eyed townsfolk shuffling toward the mine. The mother collapsed, a broken heap of tears at the counter. I called the state police. They barricaded the mine, slapped a quarantine on the town, and questioned everyone in sight. The CDC sent specialized teams. They tested the pills and found nothing but inert substances with bizarre, unknown trace molecules. They tried to interview the townspeople. All of them gave the same single, chilling answer. To enhance is to survive. Families who refused the pill had their homes violently vandalized. The pharmacy owner got dark threats scrawled in blue marker. Overnight, the town became a war zone between the enhanced and those of us who fled. I grabbed my few belongings and drove 3 hours east to warn my aunt not to visit. The next day, I unloaded everything to the authorities. They sent in more resources. Within a week, Vulture Creek was utterly abandoned. Vans arrived in the dead of night, loading up the blue-eyed people and driving them off to some unknown facility. News reports called it a voluntary relocation. Others whispered of something far more sinister. The pharmacy was padlocked, condemned by the state. I was interrogated by men in expensive suits, asked to explain exactly how the change had managed to spread so fast. The worst part is the constant, crushing uncertainty. I never found out what truly happened to everyone who vanished. Sometimes I catch a news brief about similar blue pills showing up in other far-flung rural corners of the country where nobody asks hard questions. I keep moving, constantly warning anyone who will listen not to take anything from Calyx. But every once in a while, I spot someone with those unsettling metallic blue eyes, moving with that stiff mechanical gait, talking about enhancement and survival. I wonder if the world will even notice before it's too late. Before whatever biological virus or cosmic horror spread through my small town infects everything. And I wonder if it's already too late to undo what started with a single bulk shipment. A single lonely night shift and a few chilling words spoken in the dark. Sometimes I jolt awake thinking about what Gus said. Those who enhance will survive. I wonder what exactly happens to those of us who choose not to evolve, who fight the promise of transformation hidden behind a simple capsule. Every single day, I scan for the blue glow in someone's eyes in a packed city street. Every day, I pray that true survival doesn't mean shedding your memories, your empathy, your soul. Until then, I hold on to the memory of my grandmother and those pharmacy nights, when the only real danger was the terrifying loneliness of the desert and the simple ticking of the clock. Now, in this age of digital enhancement, I've learned that the scariest monsters aren't always the ones in your head, but the ones hiding in plain sight, speaking softly, sucking away everything that makes us human, one blue pill at a time. Story 6. I landed a gig driving for Quick Ship Logistics in March of 2022. It was right after I hauled my life from Oregon to Arizona. The money was solid, the hours flexible, and I dug the freedom of being out on the road all day, dropping off boxes without having to deal with office drama or micromanagers. They stuck me on Circuit 47, a new housing development outside Mesa called Ocotillo Mesa. It was all brand new construction, rows of identical tract homes painted in bland desert hues, with sickeningly perfect lawns that stayed green even under the brutal Arizona sun. The development was massive, Over 300 houses sprawling across winding roads with names like Sunset Mirage Parkway and Stone Ridge Run. Most of the places were twins on the outside, which made finding the right door a total pain at first. But I'm good at picking up patterns, and within a week, I had the whole layout mapped in my head. The job was dead simple. Scan the parcel, snap the proof of delivery photo, leave it, and bounce. The first thing that creeped me out about Ocotillo Mesa was the sheer, unnatural quiet. I rolled through there all the time, early morning drops, afternoon hauls, and I practically never saw a living soul. No kids playing catch, no one washing their SUV, no dogs being walked, no neighbors shooting the breeze. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of someone through a window, but they never came to the porch. The packages would just vanish between my drop-off and the next visit, spirited away by unseen hands. I mentioned it to my dispatcher, Max, during our weekly check-in. "That new subdivision is a complete tomb," I told him. "I never see anybody move." He just shrugged it off. "Everyone's remote now. They probably just hide from the heat all day." Fair enough, I thought, and tried to forget it. But then I started noticing the repeating names. The exact same names kept popping up, on different packages going to different addresses. A delivery for Ethan Jones at 4501 Sunset Mirage Parkway one day. The next day, another package for Ethan Jones at 892 Cactus Bloom Trail. Same spelling, same initials. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe a father and son sharing a name, or someone constantly relocating within the development. But it kept happening. Sarah Thompson at 3 different homes. David Lee at 5 addresses. Maria Garcia at 4. Always the identical full names, never a shorthand like Sarah T. or David A. Lee. Just the complete names, replicated across the entire development, like someone was hitting copy and paste in the system. I started logging it all. I'm an inherently nosy guy, probably too curious for my own good. And these glaring flaws in the pattern drove me nuts. Over the span of a month, I documented 27 names that appeared at multiple residences. Some showed up twice, some 5 or 6 times. The all-time record belonged to a guy named Michael Davis, whose name appeared at 9 different houses. I took the list to Max. "Something's totally whacked with the Ocotillo Mesa drops. Same names keep cycling through different addresses. Is this some kind of identity fraud? Should we call someone?" Max scanned my meticulous log, frowned, and promised to look into it. A week later, he told me the development had a high volume of corporate rentals and Airbnbs, and people were likely just using different addresses for various online orders. "Nothing to panic about," he said. "Just keep moving the freight." His explanation didn't fly. These weren't impulse buys for a vacation rental. These were prescription bottles, utility bills, and regular grocery box deliveries. These were things meant for people who live somewhere, not tourists passing through. I decided to go full-on detective. I started taking wider photographs of every drop. Not just the mandatory proof shots, but pictures that captured the houses themselves. I noticed that while the homes looked inhabited from the street, cars in the driveways, patio furniture arranged neatly, something was fundamentally wrong. The same silver sedan appeared in front of 6 different homes on 6 different days. The patio chairs were always arranged in the same preset, rigid pattern. The same type of fake potted plant was placed in the exact same spot on numerous porches. It was like someone had decorated these houses using a master template, duplicating elements from one unit to the next without a single deviation. One afternoon in late April, I did something monumentally stupid. After dropping a box at 1129 Ocotillo View Drive, I circled around the side and peered through a window. The living room was fully furnished. Sofa, coffee table, massive TV on the wall, picture frames on the mantel. But it felt utterly staged. The couch pillows were too plump, too perfectly karate chopped. The magazines on the table were fanned out too neatly. Nothing was out of place. Nothing suggested human use or habitation. I moved to the kitchen window. Same disturbing perfection. Immaculate counters, the dish towel folded precisely over the oven handle, a bowl with 3 apples arranged in a perfect triangle. It looked like a model home, not a place where someone actually cooked dinner. I checked my manifest. I'd delivered to this specific address 17 times in the last 6 weeks. Different names, different products. Someone was supposed to be living here, but the house felt hollow, in a way that made my skin crawl. I made a reckless decision. I came back after my shift ended, around 7 p.m., and parked my van a few streets down from 1129 Ocotillo View Drive, the house I'd peered into. I needed to know if anyone truly occupied the place, if anyone came home from their job, flipped on the lights, or moved around inside. The sun dipped, throwing long, spooky shadows across the subdivision. The interior lights came on right on schedule at 7:15 p.m., but I never saw anyone flick the switch. They just snapped to life upstairs and down, like they were controlled by a rigid timer. I sat there for 2 hours, watching. Nothing moved inside. No shadows past the window panes, no glow from a television, no curtains shifting. Just static light illuminating perfectly empty rooms. I was about to pack it in when I saw a sight that turned my blood to ice. A figure appeared in the front living room window, standing completely motionless, staring out at the street. I couldn't make out any facial details from my distance, but the figure's posture was all wrong. Too rigid, too still, like a mannequin placed there specifically to project a fraudulent sense of occupancy. I drove home, my hands shaking violently on the steering wheel. I spent the rest of the night scrubbing through all the delivery photos I'd taken. I zoomed in on the windows, searching for any sign of life, and I found something horrifying. In several of the photos, I could clearly see figures standing in the windows, always in the exact same spot, always facing outward. And in every single photograph, the figure looked identical. Same posture, same slight head tilt, same dead-eyed stance. The next morning I called in sick. I needed time to process this insanity. I spent the morning doing a deep dive on Ocotillo Mesa, searching for any developer secrets. The builder was a shell corporation called Apex Communities, which had finished the complex in early 2021. Their site bragged about a remarkable success story, claiming all 300 homes sold out within the first year. But when I cross-referenced the public property records, the math was impossible. The homes were listed as sold, but many had been bought by dummy companies with utterly generic names. Desert Holdings Group, LLC, Southwest Investment Properties, Cactus Crest Ventures, Inc. None of them had websites or real contact information beyond P.O. boxes. I decided I had to get inside one of these houses during the day for a proper look. I picked a place I'd never delivered to, hoping it might be different. 1445 Juniper Ridge Way. I knocked on the front door, muttering a fake excuse about a misplaced package. Silence. I hammered the doorbell. Nothing. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. My heart was slamming against my ribs as I gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was furnished exactly like the one I'd spied into. Everything arranged with horrifying precision. Everything in its designated spot. But there was no dust, no trace of wear on the floors, no fingerprint smudges on the glass. It was utterly sterile, like a museum exhibit, not a home. I crept through the rooms, pulling open closets and drawers. The closets had clothes hanging inside, grouped by color. The drawers held neatly folded shirts and socks, but everything looked brand new. Some items still had the price tags attached. The refrigerator was fully stocked with food, but when I checked the expiration dates, everything was pristine. Too fresh, like it had been staged moments ago for an imminent photo shoot. I went upstairs and found 3 bedrooms, all fully furnished, all picture perfect. In the master bedroom, I discovered something that made my gut clench. A tablet sitting on the nightstand, its screen softly glowing. I snatched it up and saw a matrix of camera feeds displaying different angles of the house. Exterior cams, interior cams, all of them recording. In the corner of the screen, a timestamp and a chilling label. Unit 1445, active monitoring. I threw the tablet down and ran like the devil himself was on my heels. I didn't stop until I was back in my van, flooring the gas pedal away from Ocotillo Mesa. My phone started vibrating immediately. It was an unknown number. I ignored it. It rang again. I powered the phone completely off. When I finally got back to my apartment, I found a cryptic note taped to my door. It was handwritten in clean, rigid block letters. Curiosity noted. Discontinue inquiry. Route reassignment imminent. I called Max immediately. I need to be pulled off the Ocotillo Mesa route right now. Already handled, he said, his voice completely flat. You've been transferred to Circuit 22 starting tomorrow. Do not go back to Ocotillo Mesa for any reason. What in God's name is happening there, Max? What is that place? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Neither should you. He hung up instantly. I tried calling back, but he stopped answering. I reported everything to the local police. They listened politely and promised to send a squad car to check it out. I never heard a single word back from them. When I drove past the police station a week later, I spotted one of the officers who had taken my original statement. He stared at me with the exact same blank, vacant expression I'd seen in the windows of Ocotillo Mesa. Then, he simply looked away. I quit QuickShip a month later and relocated to Tucson. I couldn't stay in Mesa, not knowing what horror was unfolding in that development, not knowing what those houses were truly designed for. I still have zero answers. Were they safe houses? Some high-tech surveillance operation? A front for something unspeakably darker. What I know for sure is that Ocotillo Mesa is still there, still getting daily deliveries, still perfectly pretending to be a regular suburban community. And whatever is faking a life there is chillingly adept at maintaining the illusion. Sometimes I check the development on Google Maps, zooming in on the streets I used to drive. The satellite images show cars, driveways, furniture on patios, everything screaming normal life. But I know better. I know the spectral truth I uncovered. And I know that somewhere inside those identical perfect homes, something is watching, waiting, maintaining its sinister performance for an audience that has no idea it's being fooled. I still get packages sometimes at my new apartment in Tucson. And every time I see a box on my doorstep, I think about all those packages I left at those empty houses. And I wonder, in the dead of night, what truly happened to them after I drove away. Story 7. I hauled my butt to Cochise, changed from Jerome, in January of 2023. I landed a gig as a medical records grunt at a health dispensary. The building was a relic, converted from an ancient nasty mining company headquarters. Cochise is one of those creepy mountain settlements glued to the side of a cliff. It was a massive copper boomtown that almost became a genuine ghost town before the tourist money saved its skin. The structure where I worked was well over a century old. It was put up in 1917, back when the Desert Star mining syndicate controlled every square inch of Cochise. It had character, as the locals politely called it. High, dusty ceilings, walls thick as a bunker, windows that shook in the slightest breeze, and a basement that perpetually reeked of cold dirt and iron rot. The townies were full of sinister stories about the place. Every old dump in Cochise has a legend attached. They swore the night shift miners, the poor bastards who got buried in the 1923 tunnel collapse, still walked the hallways. They were still following their old, miserable routines. I am not the type to buy into ghost tales, so I'd offer a polite smile whenever someone started spinning these yarns. I filed the stories away as mere local color, the kind of creepy folklore that keeps the tourists' cash registers ringing. My job was mind-numbingly simple. I digitized antique patient charts, organized stacks of files, answered the phone, and wrestled with the clinic's archaic database. Most days, I was stuck alone in a cramped office on the second floor. I was surrounded by towering metal filing cabinets and the incessant drone of the ancient HVAC unit. The work was tedious, but it was peaceful, and I appreciated the sheer solitude after years of working in chaotic, frantic hospitals back in Phoenix. Everything was completely normal for the first 3 months. Then the budget cuts hit, and I started staying late. The clinic couldn't afford to hire enough staff. I volunteered to work evenings to tackle the immense backlog of records that needed to be scanned into the system. The clinic locked up at 6 p.m., and I would stick around until 9 or 10. I was utterly alone in the building, accompanied only by the weak security lights and the occasional chilling sound of the wind screaming outside. The first time I heard the footsteps, I rationalized it as the building just settling. Old, gigantic structures groan and pop, especially at night when the temperature plummets. But these weren't random creaks. They were deliberate, heavy, rhythmic footsteps. They were coming from the floor above me, the third floor, which had been sealed off for years due to critical structural damage. I told myself to ignore them. Then I started hearing them on my floor, heavy, hobnail boots on the scarred hardwood floor, walking straight down the main hallway outside my office, then fading away toward the stairwell. I'd fling open the door to check, and the hallway would be completely empty. The security camera feeds showed nothing but shadows. One night in early April, I decided to confront the sounds. I heard the footsteps begin on the floor above, descend the stairs, and pass directly outside my door. This time, I was ready. I opened my door immediately and scanned the hallway. I saw him. A man wearing thick, antiquated work clothes, heavy canvas pants, a dark shirt, massive boots caked in blood-red mud. He was walking away from me toward the back stairwell, moving with a horrifying purpose. "Excuse me," I shouted. "The clinic is closed. You need to leave now." He didn't so much as turn his head. He just kept marching, yanked open the stairwell door, and vanished. I sprinted after him, but when I hit the stairwell, it was empty. The door to the basement was firmly locked from my side. He couldn't have gone down there. He couldn't have gone anywhere. I stumbled back to my office and tried to force myself to focus on the scanning, but I couldn't shake the image of that man. Something about his movement was deeply unsettling, mechanical and chillingly precise, as if he was following a path etched into his mind 100 years ago. I looked up the full history of the building, searching for the truth about the 1923 catastrophe everyone whispered about. It was far, far worse than I had been told. On November 17, 1923, a methane gas explosion ripped through one of the main mining shafts during the night shift. 47 miners were trapped beneath the earth. The company, desperate to save face and fearing more disastrous collapses, made the cold, corporate decision to seal the tunnels rather than attempt a dangerous rescue. The 47 men were entombed alive, and their remains were never recovered. The building I worked in had been the company's central office at the time. It was the hub where shift supervisors tracked workers, where managers made the deadly calls. The basement, I realized with crushing horror, connected directly to the sealed tunnels. I started watching the clock. The footsteps came every single night around 8:30 p.m., right on time. Always the exact same route. Starting on the third floor, descending to the second, walking the main corridor, entering the stairwell, and marching toward the basement. One single set of heavy boots. Always the same slow, relentless pace. Then I started seeing more of them. Not just one shadow, but several. Different men, all in the same dirty, vintage work gear, all following the identical ritualistic routes. Some came down from the third floor. Others materialized on the first floor and climbed upward. They never once acknowledged each other. They never noticed my presence. They never deviated from their terrifying paths. I started timing them obsessively. The first figure appeared at 8:32 p.m., the second at 8:47 p.m., the third at 9:03 p.m., the fourth at 9:15 p.m. They appeared like clockwork, separated by rigid 15-minute intervals. They were following what must have been their old, pre-death routines from a century prior. I documented every sighting. I snapped photos, though the camera never caught anything but darkness. I recorded audio, capturing the unmistakable sound of the footsteps and distant industrial clamor, metal banging, the deep rumble of machinery that no longer physically existed. I even mounted a video camera in the hallway, desperate for tangible proof. The footage showed empty space, but the audio track was rich with the steps and faint, garbled voices, chilling, low conversations in a language I couldn't place. My supervisor finally noticed my deterioration. "Zara, you okay? You've been jumpy as hell lately." I desperately wanted to tell her the demonic truth, but I knew I'd sound utterly insane. Instead, I pressed her about the building's history, focusing on the night shift. "Oh, you heard the campfire stories," she said, giving a weak, knowing smile. "Every dump in Cochise is supposedly haunted, part of the charm." "But have you ever experienced anything?" I insisted. Her smile vanished instantly. "I don't work past sunset. I strongly suggest you do the same." That should have been my final, ultimate warning, but my cursed curiosity had me hooked. I was too obsessed, too determined to understand this recurring nightmare. I started staying even later, watching these phantom figures move through the structure, following their ancient, looping paths. One night in mid-May, I decided to commit the biggest mistake of my life. When I saw one of the minor apparitions descend the stairwell toward the basement, I followed him. The basement door was always locked, but as I reached it, I found it standing open, a black, gaping maw. I hadn't touched it. No one had. I descended the crumbling stairs, my flashlight beam cutting a weak arc through the oppressive tomb-like darkness. The air down there was ice-cold and heavy, carrying that familiar scent of wet earth and rust. But now it was overwhelming. The basement was mostly junk, rotting furniture, broken equipment, huge boxes of obsolete files. At the far end, I spotted a door I had never seen before. It was almost completely hidden behind a filing cabinet that looked petrified to the floor. I shoved the cabinet aside and tried the handle. It was unlocked. Behind it was a tunnel. Rough, hewn stone walls, splintering timber supports, descending sharply into infinite blackness. I could hear sounds emanating from below. The distant clang of metal, garbled voices, the deep, guttural rumble of machinery. I took a terrified step into the tunnel. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, but I kept going. The sounds intensified. The air became colder. I could smell smoke and sulfur and something else, something horribly organic and putrid. Then I saw them. Not just a couple, but dozens of figures. Miners shuffling through the gloom, carrying tools, pushing rattling carts, trapped in their hellish routines. They didn't see me. They acted as if I didn't exist. They were caught in an eternal loop, repeating the final, dreadful actions they had performed a century ago, never resting, never pausing. I began to back away slowly, trying to be quieter than a mouse. That's when one of them stopped dead. He turned toward me, and even in the weak glow of my flashlight, I saw his face. It was skeletal, desiccated, the skin stretched taut over bone. His eyes were horrifying, hollow sockets, but I knew he was staring directly at me. He spoke. His voice was a terrifying, dry rasp, like grit dragged over dead wood. Still clocked in. I ran. I sprinted back through that black tunnel, up the stairs, through the basement, and didn't stop until I was outside the clinic, choking on the cold night air. I sat in my car for an hour, shaking uncontrollably, desperately trying to convince myself it was a hallucination. But I knew the truth. I had seen them. I had heard their spectral toil, and one of them had spoken to me. I didn't show up for work the next day, or the day after. I called my supervisor and told her I had a dire family emergency. She didn't press me for details. Maybe she already knew. Maybe every person who clocked in for a late shift in that building knew, and they just lived in silent terror. A week later, the clinic manager called me. "Zara, we understand if you can't come back. The last night clerk left under similar duress. We should have been up front with you." "What happened to the last night clerk?" I whispered. "She wandered into the basement one night. They found her 3 days later, deep inside one of the sealed tunnels. She was completely gone, confused, raving, kept insisting she was late for her shift. She never recovered. She's in a mental facility now." I never returned to Cochise. I found a new job in Prescott, working at a sleek, modern clinic in a building that was constructed last year. No nasty history, no trapped spirits, no miners caught in eternal routines. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I hear the footsteps. Heavy boots on phantom hardwood, walking with that terrible mechanical purpose. And I wonder if those miners are still down there, still shuffling through their routes, still waiting to be relieved from a shift that ended 100 years ago. I did look up the fate of that building. The clinic moved 6 months after I quit. The old mining office now sits derelict. Windows boarded up, a condemnation notice nailed to the door. But if you visit at night, the townspeople say you can still hear the sounds. Footsteps on the sealed third floor. Voices whispering in the walls. The terrible clang of metal echoing up from the sealed tunnels below. And if you are foolish enough to break into that basement, to follow those spectral sounds into the blackness, you might find yourself trapped in a loop of your own making. Because those miners are not just ghosts. They are anchors, pulling anyone who gets too close into their perpetual routine, adding more desperate workers to a shift that will never, ever end. I think about that skeletal miner often. The one who looked at me and said those 2 words, "Still clocked in." Like he was simply stating a fact, explaining his wretched existence, trapped in the job that killed him, unable to quit, unable to rest, just following the same damned paths over and over until the end of time. I wonder how many others are down there with them now. How many nosy night clerks? How many maintenance workers? How many people who went looking for answers and found something far, far worse? And I am grateful every single minute that I ran when I did. Because if I had stayed 1 second longer, if I had let that miner reach out and touch me, I might be down there right now, still clocked in forever. Story 8. My name is Jake, and for most of my cursed life, I thought I knew my own flesh and blood. We ran a massive cattle operation near the Mexican border. The land had been in the family's clutches for 4 generations. My great-grandpa, Old Man Thorne, snapped up the property in 1943. Back then, you could still snag thousands of acres for a price that wouldn't instantly bankrupt you. We ran cattle, mostly big, stubborn Herefords. We sold the beef to major buyers in Phoenix and Tucson. It was a quiet, harsh existence out where the scorching desert kissed the open grasslands and the mountains stabbed the horizon like broken, jagged teeth. I grew up busting my butt on horseback, patching fences, and listening to my grandpa's endless, rambling stories about the old days. He finally died when I was 15, and my dad, Robert, took over the whole show. By the time I hit 30, I was basically running the entire day-to-day operation, while Dad handled the paperwork and business headaches. I had cousins who helped out, uncles who showed up for the branding season, and aunts who fed the crew during the massive roundups. We were tight, a real unit, or so I believed. The nightmare started in March of 2022. I was meticulously reviewing the annual property tax documents and noticed something deeply unsettling about the boundary lines. The ranch was officially recorded as 2,870 acres, but the latest survey insisted it was over 3,200 acres. Someone had been paying the tax bill on land that was never officially added to our deed. I brought it up to my old man. He just shrugged it off. Your grandpa, God rest his soul, added to the holdings over the decades. He bought adjacent scraps of land whenever they came cheap. Nothing to see here, son. But when I dug into the county records, there was zero evidence of any additional purchases. The property had been the exact same size since 1943. So where did the extra 333 acres of cursed land come from? And whose shadowy hands had been paying the property taxes on it? I decided to ride out and inspect the disputed boundary myself. It was on the far eastern edge of the ranch, a rocky section we barely ever touched because it was too brutal for grazing. I saddled up my horse, a gentle old mare named Saddle Tramp, and rode out just as the sun was cracking the horizon. The eastern border followed a huge, cracked wash, dry most of the year, but a flash flood killer during the monsoons. I followed the fence line for about 3 miles, checking for breaks. That's when I saw the first horrifying anomaly. A section of ground looked clearly disturbed, like someone had dug a trench and then hastily refilled it. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't ancient either, maybe a year or 2 old. I dismounted and walked closer. The earth was hard-packed now, but I could clearly see the outline of a large, rectangular excavation, roughly 6 feet by 3 feet. I'd buried enough dead livestock to instantly recognize the grim dimensions of a grave. I kept riding, my stomach churning with pure dread. Over the next 2 hours, I found 5 more patches of disturbed earth. All of them the same damn size. All of them carefully covered up and concealed, but agonizingly visible if you knew exactly what you were looking for. My gut was screaming. These weren't cattle graves. We always buried dead livestock in a designated area near the main barn, and we damn sure marked them. I took grim photographs and GPS coordinates of each site, then rode back to the ranch house. I found my father in his office, buried under a pile of invoices. "Dad," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "I found something disturbing on the eastern boundary. Looks like graves. A whole lot of them." He didn't even lift his eyes from his papers. "Old family cemetery, Jace. Your great-grandpa buried a few distant relatives out there before the county started requiring all those damn permits." "These aren't old graves," I pressed, pushing the photos at him. "The ground was moved recently, very recently." He finally looked up, and the expression in his eyes chilled me to the marrow. It wasn't surprise, or shock, or concern. It was a cold, deep resignation. "Jake, sit down, son. We need to have a long talk." What he calmly told me over the next hour utterly obliterated everything I thought I knew about my family's history. The ranch had been more than just a dusty cattle operation for decades. Starting in the 1940s, Old Man Thorne had started pulling in extra cash by helping people dispose of bodies. He claimed it wasn't murder victims initially. It was people who died of natural causes, whose poor families couldn't afford a proper, licensed burial. It was a community service, Dad claimed, a way to help folks dodge the crippling funeral costs. But over the generations, the service had metastasized. By the 1960s, my grandfather was being paid cash under the table by brutal criminal organizations to bury their problems. People who vanished and needed to stay vanished forever. The ranch was the perfect, terrifying location for it. It was isolated, massive, and there were no nosy neighbors within 20 miles. And my family, the Thornes, made damn good money doing the devil's work. "How many?" I managed to whisper, my voice catching in my throat. "I don't know the exact count. Dozens. Maybe more than that." "And you knew about this? You've been a part of this nightmare?" "It's how we survive, Jace. The cattle business is barely a trickle. It never has been enough to keep this land. Your cousins, your uncles, they all know. They all participate. We're a family enterprise." I shot to my feet, my chair screeching against the floor. "This is completely insane. We're talking about covering up murder, hiding bodies for criminals." "We aren't the ones doing the killing," my father said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We're just providing a service. What happens before the bodies hit our property is not our burden." I drove straight to the nearest town, driving blind, trying to process the absolute horror. My family, the people I had trusted my entire miserable life, were accomplices in a mass grave operation. They had been disposing of dead people for decades, and they saw absolutely nothing morally wrong with it. I thought about racing to the police, but I choked. They were my blood, my father, my cousins, the people I shared holiday meals with. How could I condemn them to a life behind bars? But the chilling decision was ripped from my hands a week later. I was out fixing a section of fence on the southern boundary when I noticed glaringly fresh tire tracks leading into a rarely visited part of the ranch. I followed them and found my cousin Devin and my uncle Ben digging a new hole. A body, wrapped tightly in black plastic sheeting, lay nearby on the dirt. "Jake," Devin said, not even flinching when he saw me. "Dad told us you're in the loop now. We could use the extra muscle." I stared at the plastic bundle. Even through the cheap wrapping, I could see it was tiny. A child. "What the hell happened?" I croaked, my voice shaking violently. "Doesn't matter," Uncle Ben grunted, shoveling dirt. "We don't ask questions. We just do the job." "That's a kid, Ben. You're burying a kid." "And their people are paying us very well to make damn sure no one ever finds them. That's the business model." I turned away, walked back to my truck, climbed in, and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the FBI field office in Phoenix. I spilled everything. Every detail about the graves, the family business, the child's body I had just witnessed. They listened with terrifying professional calm, took meticulous notes, and promised a full-scale investigation. The ensuing nightmare took 4 agonizing months. Using ground-penetrating radar, the FBI discovered 87 bodies buried across the ranch, spanning from the 1940s to the present day. Some were recently interred. Some had been rotting there since my great-grandfather first bought the cursed land. The FBI arrested my father, 3 uncles, 4 cousins, and 2 family friends who were part of the operation. The ranch was immediately seized as critical evidence. I lost everything, in a single catastrophic instant. My home, my livelihood, my entire family structure. My father refused to speak my name. My mother, who swore on a stack of Bibles she knew nothing about the horrific burials, fled to California to hide with her sister. My siblings cut me out of their lives completely, calling me a rat and a traitor. I was placed into a rudimentary witness protection program while the trial proceeded. I testified against my own blood, detailing what I found, what I was told, and what I had witnessed. The prosecutor hailed my testimony as absolutely essential to the case. The defense attorney, a cold-eyed shark, called me a liar and an opportunist trying to steal the family fortune. In the end, my father was sentenced to 25 years. My uncles and cousins got similar, massive sentences. The trial revealed that the ranch had been utilized by multiple, brutal criminal organizations over the decades. Powerful drug cartels, organized crime syndicates, and vicious human trafficking rings. The bodies belonged to murder victims, missing people, and those who had been erased without a trace. The media frenzy was a spectacle of pure horror. National news outlets ran screaming headlines about the Thorne family ranch of death, turning our tragedy into cheap, sensational entertainment. Reporters camped outside the courthouse like vultures. My face was plastered across every television screen and newspaper in the country. I received brutal death threats from people connected to the cartels my family had worked with, and from other, deranged people who thought I should have shown loyalty to my blood. The hardest part was finally learning the identities of the victims. The FBI successfully identified 32 of the 87 bodies. They had names, faces, families who had been searching for them for decades. I read their stories, looked at their heartbreaking photographs, and realized I had grown up playing cowboys on what was essentially a mass grave. I had ridden saddle tramp directly over their resting places. I had celebrated birthdays and holidays while they lay forgotten and decomposing beneath the soil. One victim was a 16-year-old girl who vanished from a gas station in 1987. Her mother had spent 35 years searching, plastering flyers everywhere, hiring PIs, never giving up hope. When the FBI confirmed her daughter's remains, the mother thanked me through broken tears. She said, "At least now I can finally bury her properly. We have closure." But not every family was grateful. Some blamed me for not speaking up sooner. They demanded to know why it took me 30 years to notice the horror happening on my own goddamn property. They asked how I could have been so blind, so willfully ignorant. And they were absolutely right. I should have known. I should have questioned the sudden mysterious cash flow, the weird phone calls, the late-night visitors who came and went like ghosts. I live in Oregon now, under a brand new name. I flip switches and stock shelves at a Home Depot, a job where nobody asks questions about my history. I never talk about Arizona. I never talk about ranching. I never talk about the Thorns. When people ask where I'm from, I mumble Wyoming and change the subject immediately. But I think about those 87 people every single day. I wonder how many more forgotten souls are still out there, buried on other ranches, hidden by other families who decided that dirty money was more important than a human life. I wonder how many farms and properties across the Southwest are providing the same sinister service, maintaining the same horrifying silence. The ranch was finally sold at a public auction. A real estate company bought it, planning to build a cookie-cutter housing development. But when the gruesome truth about the bodies leaked, people protested violently. They screamed that it was sacrilege to build homes on a mass grave, that the land should be preserved as a memorial to the victims. The developer finally ditched the project, and the ranch now sits empty, slowly being reclaimed by the angry desert. Sometimes I think about driving back, just to see the cursed landscape one last time. But I know I never will. That place is a monument to everything I lost, everything I was complicit in through my silence and my willful ignorance. My family is annihilated, scattered, or imprisoned. The land is permanently cursed, marked forever by the crimes committed there, and all I have left is the crushing weight of guilt and the knowledge that I could have stopped it decades earlier if I had just been paying attention. People always ask if I regret turning in my own blood. The answer is incredibly complicated. I regret that the nightmare happened at all. I regret that I was raised in a family that saw absolutely nothing wrong with profiting from death. But I absolutely do not regret doing the right thing, even though it cost me literally everything I had. Because, at the end of the day, those 87 people deserved justice. They deserved to be found, to be identified, to be mourned properly. And if I had stayed silent, if I had chosen my family over the truth, they would still be lying out there, forgotten in the desert. Their stories would remain untold, and their families would still be searching for ghosts. That is something I could never live with. So I live with this instead. The isolation, the crushing fear, the vivid nightmares. It is the necessary price I pay for finally doing what should have been done decades ago. And I would pay it all again. Story 9. I took the job as night janitor at Palo Verde Medical Center, changed from Yuma, in August of 2021. I needed the cash bad and didn't mind the isolation of working alone. The hospital was small-time by city standards, maybe 100 beds total. It served a brutal border town where the summer heat could melt your brain, and the nearest decent medical center was a grueling 2-hour drive away. The main structure was late 1980s, but there was a rotting, older wing that had been completely sealed off in the mid-1990s due to serious structural damage and massive budget cuts. My shift kicked off at 10 p.m. and wrapped up at 6 a.m. I was responsible for scrubbing the active wards, mopping miles of hallways, emptying mountains of trash, sanitizing the bathrooms, and generally making sure everything was spotless for the day crew. Like most rural facilities, the hospital was horribly understaffed. I worked solo, accompanied only by a skeleton crew of tired nurses and a single security guard who basically lived in his basement office watching CCTV feeds. The work was boring but peaceful. I'd plug in my earbuds, listen to true crime podcasts, and let my mind wander while my hands ran on autopilot. Most of the patients were doped up and asleep by the time I arrived, and the night nurses were grateful just to have someone willing to pull the graveyard shift without complaining. It was barely my third week when I first heard the patient call button from the closed-off wing. I was pushing my mop bucket down the third-floor hallway around 2 in the morning when I heard it. That distinctive, sickening electronic chime, followed by a dry, echoing voice over the loudspeaker. "Nurse, I need help. Room 312. I froze, dropping the mop handle, and looked around wildly. Room 312 was in the East Wing, the section that had been condemned and sealed for almost 30 years. I walked quickly to the main nurses' station and checked in with Patty, the night nurse on duty. "Did you just hear that call button?" I asked, my voice tight. She looked up from her charts, annoyed. "What call button?" "Room 312. Someone just pressed it." Patty frowned hard. "Listen, man, that wing has been dark since before I even got this job. The power is totally disconnected. You must have imagined it." I went back to cleaning, but the dread clung to me like cheap cologne. An hour later, I was cleaning out the supply closet when I heard it again. Same room, same chilling voice. "Nurse, I need help. Room 312. This time, I decided screw it. I was investigating. I found the entrance to the closed wing. It was a set of faded double doors plastered with peeling signs warning that the area was strictly restricted. The doors weren't locked. I pushed them open and stepped into a hallway that smelled violently of dust and deep-seated decay. The air here was instantly different. Colder, staler, like walking into a crypt. I flipped on my heavy-duty flashlight and moved slowly down the corridor. The room numbers were still barely visible on the doors. 301, 303, 305. I stopped dead at 312. The door was ajar. I shoved it wider and blasted my light inside. The room wasn't furnished with anything modern. It had ancient beds and equipment from decades past. A patient monitor from the 1980s. An IV stand with yellowed, brittle tubing. A bedside table with a water pitcher caked in dust. And in the bed, someone was lying there. An elderly man, rail-thin and unnaturally pale, covered with a sheet pulled up to his chest. His eyes were wide open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling, cloudy with cataracts. "Sir," I whispered, my voice shaking like a leaf. "Are you all right?" He didn't respond. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't even seem to be breathing. I took a terrified step closer, and that's when I saw his hospital ID bracelet. The date printed on the band was June 14th, 1992. I bolted. I scrambled out of the room and ran until I found Patty at the nurse's station, babbling what I'd seen. She looked at me with clinical concern, the kind of look you give someone who is clearly having a psychotic break. "Harper, there is no one in that wing. It's been empty for 30 years. I saw him. Room 312. There's a man in the bed." She sighed, utterly exasperated, and finally called security. The guard, a middle-aged guy named Jim, agreed to check the wing with me. We walked back together, my light slicing through the darkness. When we reached 312, the room was empty. The bed was there, stripped bare. No patient, no equipment, no sign that anything had been moved. "See?" Jim said, shrugging. "Nothing. Old places make noise. They play tricks on your tired eyes. It happens." But I knew what I saw. I started watching the place like a hawk after that night. I would circle past the entrance to the closed wing repeatedly during my shift, listening. And I started hearing more. Not just the ghostly call buttons, but low, indistinct voices. Conversations that sounded murmured and indistinct, drifting from behind those double doors. One night in early September, I made the decision to document this madness. I brought in a small voice recorder and set it up near the double doors leading to the east wing. I let it run for the entire shift, 8 full hours of audio. When I played it back the next day, the playback chilled me to the bone. I heard footsteps, a multitude of them, and the voices were clearer this time. Patients asking for water, pleading for pain medication, begging for someone to adjust their pillows. I did a deep dive into the hospital's history. The East Wing had been the original general patient ward when the facility first opened in 1987. It housed mostly elderly residents from Yuma and the surrounding area. But in the early 1990s, things got ugly. Budget cuts led to massive understaffing. Patients were horribly neglected. Some died from complications that should have been preventable. In 1993, a state investigation uncovered systematic negligence, and the wing was permanently closed. But that wasn't the whole rotten story. I found an old news clipping from 1986, before the hospital was even built. The site had been hugely controversial because it was being constructed over an indigenous burial ground. The Quechan tribe had violently protested, stating the land was sacred and should never be disturbed. The hospital brass ignored them and pushed ahead. During the construction phase, workers uncovered human remains. Instead of halting the project, the developers quietly relocated the bones and kept building. The more I learned, the more I understood. The patients in the closed wing weren't just echoes of the 1990s. They were older, more terrifying. I started seeing them during my nightly rounds, figures in pale hospital gowns walking the active hallways at exactly 2 a.m., always following the same predictable routes. They never acknowledged me. They never spoke to me. They just walked, as if heading toward some crucial, unavoidable appointment. One night in late September, I was cleaning the main third-floor corridor when I saw a line of them. 10, maybe 12 patients, all walking in single file toward the east wing. I plastered myself against the wall and watched them glide past. Their feet made zero sound. Their faces were blank, their eyes totally unfocused. They moved like sleepwalkers, shuffling forward with terrifying mechanical precision. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to finally understand the source of the horror. Maybe some delusional part of me thought I could help them find peace. They walked straight through the double doors into the closed wing, and I followed them at a distance. They continued down the dusty corridor, past the old patient rooms, toward a section of the building I had never seen. At the very end of the hall was a stairwell leading down. The patients descended one by one, disappearing into the absolute darkness below. I followed them down the stairs. The temperature plunged dramatically with each step, and the air grew thick with the smell of cold earth and stone. At the bottom was a thick door marked "Basement, Authorized Personnel Only." The patients simply walked right through it, as if it were vapor. I tried the handle. It was locked tight. But through the small, grimy window in the door, I could see them. They were walking through what looked like a complex network of tunnels, old passages that must have been part of the original mining construction, and they were all heading in the same terrifying direction, toward something I couldn't see in the gloom. I reported every detail to the hospital administrator the very next day. I showed her the chilling audio recordings, described the parade of the dead, and begged her to call someone, anyone, to investigate. She listened with a tight, unreadable expression. Then she told me that several night staff members before me had reported identical experiences. "We don't advertise it," she said, her voice dropping. "But yes, there is unusual activity in the old wing. We've had priests bless it. We've had paranormal investigators come through. Nothing ever helps. The patients just keep walking." "Why didn't anyone tell me this nightmare?" I asked, completely defeated. "Because most people quit the instant they find out. We are desperate for night custodians, and they are nearly impossible to find. I'm sorry, Harper. If you need to leave, I understand completely." I didn't quit right away. I was broke and needed the job. But I started avoiding the East Wing like a plague. I scrubbed the active wards and stayed as far as possible from those double doors. But I could still hear them sometimes. The ghostly call buttons, the murmured voices, the sound of the footsteps of patients who died decades ago, still making their inevitable nightly rounds. It was early October when I had my final, shattering encounter. I was cleaning near the third-floor nurses' station when the power failed. Total darkness instantly, just the emergency lights glowing dimly red in the hallway. I heard Jim on the radio saying it was a transformer issue and power would be restored soon. But in the sudden darkness, I saw them more clearly than ever before. The hallway was filled with patients, dozens of them, all wearing hospital gowns from different eras. Some looked recent, others looked ancient. They moved through the active ward like smoke, walking through walls, passing right through equipment, all heading inexorably toward the East Wing. Then one of them stopped. An elderly woman, her gown stained and ripped, her face gaunt and hollowed out. She turned and looked directly at me. Her eyes were empty sockets, void of any life or recognition. But she spoke, her voice a dry, papery whisper. "Do you know where we are going?" I couldn't answer. I was paralyzed, utterly incapable of moving or speaking. She waited for a frozen moment, then turned and continued with the others, dissolving right through the wall that separated the active ward from the condemned wing. When the power finally flickered back on, I was alone in the hallway, shaking uncontrollably. I went straight to the administrator's office and quit that night. I didn't give notice, didn't ask for my final paycheck. I just ran. I learned later that the hospital brass knew far more than they ever admitted. A former nurse told me that in 1993, after the East Wing was closed, workers clearing out the space found grim evidence that confused patients had been wandering the tunnels beneath the hospital for years. Some had gotten lost and died down there. Their bodies were discovered weeks later, still in their gowns, having succumbed to dehydration and exposure in the darkness. The hospital covered it all up, claiming the deaths were unrelated accidents. But the brutal truth was that neglected, confused patients had been walking those endless tunnels for years, and no one noticed until it was too late. I think about those lost patients all the time. The ones still walking, still following their routines, still desperately searching for something they will never find. The hospital is still operating, still hiring desperate night custodians who have no idea what ancient horror they are walking into. And somewhere beneath it all, in those dark tunnels under sacred, violated ground, the lost keep marching. I live in Phoenix now, working at a coffee joint during normal daylight hours. No more night shifts, no more hospitals, no more encounters with things that should not exist in this world. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that terrifying elderly woman who looked into my eyes and asked where they were going. I still don't have an answer, and I'm deathly afraid that neither does she.